I'm real over it. We've talked before about, introverts, extroverts, and how this is another way of figuring out, where you get your energy from. And I am an introvert. I get my energy from being alone. But I have had enough aloneness to last me a while. I am glad that you've joined me this morning. I hope that you are feeling rested from the weekend. I hope you were able to unplug, get away from the screens. We kept our social media quiet over the weekend in the hopes that would contribute to that. Just to help you guys find it easier to get a little peace, a little time away from all of the chaos and the noise. So now as we set back to our tasks, school, work, all of the other demands that are put on our time, we are going to jump back into the Word together. We have crossed the halfway point of 1 Samuel. We're in 1 Samuel chapter 20 this morning. Isn't that amazing? In the last 4 weeks, we have gotten almost all the way through one of the longer Old Testament narrative books. There are only 11 chapters left. And I'm thinking about where to go next, because obviously with the stay-at-home order extended until the first week of May, we're going to be at this for a little bit longer. So we're going to keep praying for patience from God and for persistence through the middle of all of this, and for hope. We're going to keep expecting that this is God's provision for us in His wisdom, and that this is part of His timing, and we're going to trust Him. We're going to keep trusting Him, even if it gets extended to the end of May. And we're going to keep finding creative ways to love one another, and to love our God, and to share the good news about Him. So, if you're ready, we're going to turn to the Psalms as we always do. We left off with Psalm 59 last time we were together. We begin now with Psalm 60. And as we go into this one, I want to give a little bit of context, because this is a different kind of psalm than one we've come across before. If you're looking at it, you might have a header in your translation, depending on your translation, that says that this is a miktam of David. That's just another way of saying it's a particular kind of psalm. But then it tells us it is for instruction. So, in other words, this is a psalm that's intended for teaching purposes. Right? There are a couple of these that we come across in the Psalms. The most famous one is Psalm 119, which we have good reason to believe was originally a tool that was designed to teach little ones the Hebrew alphabet. It's an acrostic. But this one is what we would call, this one is categorized as a poem about the land of Israel and about the history of Israel. So at the time that David writes this one, he's in the middle of a battle with the Edomites, who lived south of Israel's territory. And what gets talked about here in all of this is how God gives territory, gives victory to His people. And as I read this, what I think about is how God intends to eventually give victory to His people, not just against, localized enemies in Edom in the Valley of Salt, which is the battle that David's thinking of in particular in this psalm, but over the whole world. The flesh, the devil, when Christ returns and sets up His kingdom on earth, for which there will be no end, and of which we will be a part. So here's what David has to say. O God, You have rejected us, broken our defenses, You have been angry. Oh, restore us. You have made the land to quake, You have torn it open, repair its breaches, for it totters. It doesn't mean literally here, he means the land is in like the people, right? The people are quaking. They're beginning to come apart. You have made Your people see hard things. You have given us wine to drink that made us stagger. That wine there, that's an image of the wrath of God. Very often when you see wine appear where God is giving wine to someone, it's a way of saying God is handing someone the results of His anger against sin. Right? He's saying these are the consequences. Verse 4. You have set up a banner for those who fear You, that they may flee to it from the bow, that Your beloved ones may be delivered. Give salvation by Your right hand and answer us. Okay, so there's the turn here. David is saying, okay, so the battle's going against us. We are asking God for help. We're repenting. We're turning away from sin. Verse 6. God has spoken in his holiness. With exultation I will divide up Shechem and portion out the vale of Succoth. Gilead is mine, Manasseh is mine. Ephraim is my helmet, Judah is my scepter. Moab is one of Israel's enemies, is my wash basin. Upon Edom, again Israel's enemy, I cast my shoe. Over Philistia, the Philistines, I shout in triumph. In other words, God is saying, there is no way that I'm going to let my people be destroyed. I'm going to step in and I am going to save you. I'm going to divide up the enemy's territory, Shechem, the vale of Succoth, and everything that they have taken from Israel, the territory of Gilead, Manasseh, Ephraim, Judah, I will take back. It is mine. It belongs to me. Verse 9, who will bring me to the fortified city? Who will lead me to Edom? Have you not rejected us, O God? You do not go forth, O God, with our armies. O grant us help against the foe, for vain is the salvation of man. With God we shall do valiantly. It is he who will tread down our foes. This is good. Let's take a minute to pray. So as I've said before, I'm just letting you in on my own personal devotions. And that means that there are times when I come to this word and my heart, my mind, my body are sometimes just unprepared or not feeling well or not quite ticking right. And I've talked about the idea before of using parts of pre-written prayers to help me pray. Right? Today, I'm tired. I didn't sleep well all weekend for various reasons. The kiddos were, up and about, and they're getting stir crazy too. And so my brain is tired. It's hard to think. And I know that if I approach God in prayer right now, it's going to be flat, and it will be difficult for me to give him all of my heart. I need something to stir my affection for him. So I've talked about this book, Every Moment Holy, before. Super good. If you don't have a copy, I would love to get you one, because this book just contains prayers for moments when we don't often think of praying, prayers for occasions when we don't often think of praying, that are intended not to replace our own extemporaneous prayer to God, but to give us language, heart language to approach him with. This prayer is, I think, very appropriate right now. A liturgy for being alone. So I'm going to pray this to God. Use your own words. I will be praying in my own heart as I read. Let's go to him together. You created us for companionship, O God. You created us for the sharing of burdens, for the joining of celebrations, for breaking bread and fellowship, and so it is not unnatural that we should taste a particular sorrow. So we ask today, in our self-isolation, that you would sit with us and linger with us. Christ, sit with us as our brother. Sit with us as our shepherd. Sit with us as our friend. In the fully know your presence. In this silence where there is no conversation, we ask that you would help us to more clearly hear your voice. Please use our momentary loneliness to work in us a more effective sympathy for others who are often alone, the sick, the elderly, the poor, for those who long for the companionship of their God and of his people. We ask that afterward, when this is past, that you would help us to be more intentional in the practice of hospitality. We ask that you would help us, allow us to sometimes be the reason that the loneliness of others is relieved. So meet us now in our own loneliness, O Lord. Meet us in this moment and in this meal of the word. We receive it as your provision for our lives in this hour. And in Jesus' name, we pray all of this. Amen. Let's turn to 1 Samuel together, shall we? 1 Samuel chapter 20. So, if you'll recall, we just finished hearing about Saul's attempts to murder David and all of the really wild ways that God intervenes. And there's that that funny little scene at the end of the chapter where Saul himself decides to go retrieve David from his little refuge up on the hill at Naioth with Samuel, you recall. And Saul winds up naked and prophesying before the Lord, and people ask that sarcastic question, oh, is Saul also among the prophets? Well, if you recall, chapter 20, verse 1 begins by telling us that David fled from Naioth. And now we come to, I think, one of the saddest parts of 1 Samuel 20, just in terms of the human poignancy. 1 Samuel chapter 20 is the last time that David and his beloved friend Jonathan are together. And in a way, this is Jonathan's finest moment. Maybe his second finest. We'll see. It depends on how you'll feel about it when we get to the end of the book. But this might be Jonathan's finest moment, because in this moment, Jonathan takes his own life into his hands for the sake of his friend, knowing that he will never see him again, knowing that he'll probably never see him again, and knowing that if he does see him again, that David will be taking his place in his position as the rightful king of Israel. Jonathan, man, he stands. There's an irony. You know, when his father gets anointed king, we're told that he stands head and shoulders above all the men of Israel, but here, Jonathan stands head and shoulders above his own father. Let's read it together. Then David fled from Naioth and Ramah and came and said before Jonathan, "What have I done? What is my guilt? And what is my sin before your father that he seeks my life?" And Jonathan said to him, "Far from it, you shall not die. Behold, my father does nothing either great or small without disclosing it to me. And why should my father hide this from me? It is not so." So Jonathan is not skeptical, but he's surprised, because Saul normally takes Jonathan into all of his counsels. But Jonathan, if you'll recall, has been off fighting the Philistines. He doesn't know what's been going on back at court. So David brings this news to him out in the field, and Jonathan's shook. "What do you mean Dad's trying to kill you?" Verse 3. But David vowed again, saying, "Your father knows well that I have found favor in your eyes." And he thinks, "Do not let Jonathan know this, lest he be grieved. But truly, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, there is but a step between me and death." You can feel David's anxiety, his fear. Verse 4. Then Jonathan said to David, "Whatever you say, I will do for you." David said to Jonathan, "Behold, tomorrow is the new moon, and I should not fail to sit at the table with the king. But let me go, that I may hide myself in the field till the third day at evening. If your father misses me at all, then say, 'David earnestly asked leave of me to run to Bethlehem, his city, for there is a yearly sacrifice there for all the clan.' If he says, 'Good,' it will be well with your servant. But if he is angry, then know that harm is determined by him." So let's stop here real quick, just so you understand what's going on. The Jews traditionally held a feast every time the new moon came around, once a month. There's a lot of background to that, not the point. Point is that David is supposed to be sitting at the king's side when that feast happens, because he's the king's armor bearer. Now, the question is, did Saul just have like another crazy episode, or is he really persistently trying to kill David? And that's what's at question here. So basically the plan is, Jonathan's going to go to that feast. David's obviously not going to be there. And if Saul is upset that David isn't there, then Jonathan is supposed to say, "Hey, David went to go have the feast with his family in Bethlehem." And if Saul's okay with that, then okay, maybe we can work this out. But if Saul is upset or frustrated, then David is saying to Jonathan, then you need to realize that that's part of his plot. He wants me near him so he can kill me. Verse 8, David is still speaking. He says, "Therefore deal kindly with your servant." Have you ever used that kind of language with a friend before? This is a side, I think that demonstrates how close they are and how much David realizes he's at Jonathan's mercy right now. "For you have brought your servant into a covenant of the Lord with you. But if there is guilt in me, kill me yourself, for why should you bring me to your father?" And Jonathan said, "Far be it from you. If I knew that it was something determined by my father that harm would come to you, would I not tell you?" Then David said to Jonathan, "Who will tell me if your father answers you roughly?" And Jonathan said to David, "Come, let's go out into the field." So they both went out into the field. And Jonathan said to David, now this language here is covenant language. Jonathan is swearing an oath before God. This is significant. Jonathan said to David, "The Lord, the God of Israel, be witness. When I have sounded out my father about this time tomorrow or the third day, behold, if he is well disposed toward David, shall I not then send and disclose it to you? But should it please my father to do you harm, the Lord do so to Jonathan and more also, if I do not disclose it to you and send you away, that you may go in safety. May the Lord be with you, as he has been with my father. If I am still alive, show me the steadfast love of the Lord, that I may not die, and do not cut off your steadfast love from my house forever, when the Lord cuts off from every one of the enemies of David the face of the earth." And Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, "May the Lord take vengeance on David's enemies." Whew. And Jonathan made David swear again by his love for him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul. So Jonathan basically takes David out of the field where no one else can see or hear, and he basically swears the loyalty oath of the kingship to David, which is not something he'd done before. He gave David all of the symbols of his princedom, right, as the prince of Israel, but now he swears to David as the king, and basically says, "Look, I will do what you've asked me to do. If I don't survive this, take care of my family." Jonathan's married; he's got some kids at this point. We'll get into that later. And he says, if I do survive, then know that I've got your back. And he asks God, is part of this covenant, to destroy all of David's enemies, which Jonathan is beginning to suspect might include his own father. This is heavy stuff. Verse 18, so now Jonathan tells him what the plan is. "Tomorrow is the new moon, and you will be missed because your seat will be empty. On the third day, go down quickly to the place where you hid yourself when the matter was in hand, and remain beside the stone heap." There's to say there's a field, evidently, where David pulled Jonathan in and where they talked, and he's saying, just go back to that spot. "And I will shoot 3 arrows to the side of it as though I was shooting at a target. And behold, I will send the boy who is with me, saying, go find the arrows. If I say to the boy, look, the arrows are on this side of you, take them, then you are to come, for as the Lord lives, it is safe for you, and there is no danger. But if I say to the youth, look, the arrows are beyond you, then go, for the Lord has sent you away. And as for the matter of which you and I have spoken, behold, the Lord is between you and me forever." So there's the plan. Now here's what happens. So David hid himself in the field, and when the new moon came, the king sat down to eat food. The king sat on his seat, as at other times, on the seat by the wall. He's sitting by the wall so that no one can come stab him in the back. That's not normal. He should be sitting at the head of the table, but if he sits at the head of the table, his back's exposed. So he puts himself in a place not at the head of the table with his back to the wall. Saul's paranoid. Jonathan sat opposite, and Abner sat by Saul's side, but David's place was empty. Yet Saul did not say anything that day, for he thought, something has happened to him. He's not clean, or surely he is not clean. But on the second day, the day after the new moon, David's place was still empty, and Saul said to Jonathan his son, "Why has not the son of Jesse come to the meal either yesterday or today?" Jonathan answered Saul, "David earnestly asked leave of me to go to Bethlehem. He said, 'Let me go, for our clan holds a sacrifice in the city, and my brother has commanded me to be there. So now, if I have found favor in your eyes, let me get away and see my brothers.' For this reason he has not come to the king's table." Then Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan, and he said, "You son of a perverse, rebellious woman." Pause. That's a very, very polite translation of what he actually says. What he actually says I won't repeat. "Do I not know that you have chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness?" Again, another very polite translation. Just leave it at that. Verse 31. "For as long as the son of Jesse lives on the earth, neither you nor your kingdom shall be established. Therefore send and bring him to me, for he shall surely die." Whew. Then Jonathan answered Saul his father, "Why should he be put to death? What has he done?" But Saul hurled his spear at him to strike him. So Jonathan knew that his father was determined to put David to death, and Jonathan rose from the table in fierce anger, and ate no food the second day of the month, for he was grieved for David, because his father had disgraced him. In the morning Jonathan went out into the field to the appointment with David, and with him a little boy. And he said to his boy, "Run and find the arrows that I shoot." As the boy ran, he shot an arrow beyond him. And when the boy came to the place of the arrow that Jonathan had shot, Jonathan called after the boy and said, "Is not the arrow beyond you?" And Jonathan called after the boy, "Hurry, be quick, do not stay." So Jonathan gathered up the arrows and came to his master, but the boy knew nothing. That is to say, he didn't know that he was being used to send a signal. Only Jonathan and David knew the matter. Verse 40. And Jonathan gave his weapons to the boy and said to him, "Go and carry them to the city." And as soon as the boy had gone, David rose from behind the stone heap and fell on his face to the ground and bowed 3 times. This is a deep expression of respect and of affection and honor. And they kissed one another and wept with one another, David weeping the most. Then Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, because we have sworn both of us in the name of the Lord, saying, 'The Lord shall be between me and you, and between my offspring and your offspring forever.' And he rose and departed, and Jonathan went into the city." Whew. This is tough stuff. It's impossible to get around that. So when the conclusion of the matter comes, Saul is at this point so determined to kill David that he risks the life of his own heir just to vent his anger at David. throwing a spear at Jonathan in front of his entire court at a new moon festival. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, I hope none of you have had the experience of one of your parents trying to kill you over a meal, but imagine being Jonathan. Imagine being in that position and your own father trying to murder you like that over a friend, over you trying to just, make sure that everything's cool and copacetic here. So Jonathan is angry. He goes to David. He sends him sort of the appropriate signal, and then once they're able to get rid of the audience, they have their final moment together as friends. And David is grieved because I have a feeling, the Bible doesn't say this explicitly, this is just my take on it. I think David knows he's never going to see Jonathan again. I think Jonathan probably knows it too, which is why David is weeping so much and why Jonathan is relatively reserved. Jonathan understands that what's probably going to happen at this point is that given that Saul is opposed to the enemies of the Lord, and that Jonathan just swore an oath before God that involved saying, may God take revenge on all of David's enemies, Jonathan realizes he's probably going to get caught up in whatever God winds up doing to take revenge on the house of Saul. And David knows too. Now, that's a complicated issue, and if that sounds very strange, if that's like, why would God do that to Jonathan? Understand, there are a couple of things at play here. First of all, God's not doing anything to Jonathan. As a matter of fact, God intervenes later on in some very significant ways to preserve Jonathan and preserve Jonathan's legacy, and we'll talk about that if we get to 2 Samuel. But the main thing to understand is that Saul does not get to choose the consequences of his sin. He got to choose his path, right? He got to choose to reject God and to reject the appropriate responsibilities of the king of Israel. He got to choose that. But he doesn't get to choose what happens next. And in that sense, that's sobering for us. We too can choose our sin, but we don't get to choose the consequences of it. But that's not the only thing to take away here. I think the main walk away from this text is, first of all, we've talked about this already, what a friend Jonathan is. I hope you have a friend like that. We were built for that kind of friendship. In my experience, especially between men, our culture doesn't have a good category for a friendship that is this close. The kind of friendship where two men could kiss one another, not in a non-romantic way, and it would be an expression of love and not awkward and not weird and not gross. As an aside, that's actually the historical norm. There's some fascinating photos you can find on the internet of Welsh coal miners from the 1910s. We've talked about this before as a youth group. Just an interesting social phenomenon is that, girls who are friends sit on each other's laps and they hold hands and they hug and that kind of thing. And dudes who are friends fist bump, and that's about as much physical touching as there is between them, right? You don't want to be perceived as weird or fruity or anything like that, and I get that. But notice how unashamed and expressive David and Jonathan are toward one another. We talked before about the idea that there are some commentators who look at the relationship between David and Jonathan and say that there must have been some kind of homosexual attraction between them. No, they just don't understand friendship. And here's the biggest component of this. We have a friend as believers enough to face their father's wrath in order to save us from death. The difference here is that you and I deserved the wrath of this father. You and I deserved death, and this friend did not. I'm thinking, of course, of Jesus. And it is not a stretch at all to say that Jonathan acts here as a type of Christ, facing his father's spirit, right? So that he can say to David, go in peace. Again, the difference here is that David is innocent. You and I are not. And yet, every day, his grace and mercy toward us is new every single morning. He doesn't sit down at the end of the night after we've laid down and had another miserable day full of spiritual failure and to tick off all the ways that we've messed up and kind of look at the ledger sheet and say, well, this is what I paid for this believer to come into my family and be adopted into my name, and here's how they've performed, and these balance sheets don't line up. He doesn't do that. He is a friend that sticks closer than a brother, as Proverbs puts it. For that. Because I don't know about you, but quarantine, the changes in our rhythms, they have a way of bringing out, at least in my experience, and just from talking to you guys, I think your experience too, they have a way of bringing out the hidden petty sins in us, if that makes sense. The ways in which we quickly get frustrated, that we're a little too quick with a word, or the ways in which we, when stressed or anxious or fearful or scared or tired or bored, don't go to God, but go to other things. It reveals what we really worship. We've talked about this idea at length before. And yet, God's not fussed. He's not going to leave us there. He's not going to leave us in that condition. He will work to sanctify us, to make us more like Jesus, because he knows that this is the only way that we will ever experience lasting joy in him. But he's also not impatient with us, the way that we so rapidly get impatient with each other, the way that we get so impatient with our circumstances, with the things that we have to face. As you move into this day, as I move into the balance of this day, let's be thinking of, first, the kinds of friends that we have who are like Jonathan, and the ways that we can serve one another in this kind of self-giving, self-sacrificing friendship. But more than that, let's be thinking of the true friend, Jesus. I think of the words of that hymn, "My song is love unknown. This," speaking of Jesus, "is my friend in whose sweet praise I all my days could gladly spend." Back to the Psalms. We read Psalm 60 at the outset. Psalm 61. This is also a psalm of David. "Hear my cry, O God. Listen to my prayer. From the end of the earth I call to you when my heart is faint. Lead me to the rock that is higher than I, for you have been my refuge, a strong tower against the enemy. Let me dwell in your tent forever. Let me take refuge under the shelter of your wings, for you, O God, have heard my vows. You have given me the heritage of those who fear your name. Prolong the life of the king. May his years endure to all generations. May he be enthroned forever before God. Appoint steadfast love and faithfulness to watch over him. So will I ever sing praises to your name as I perform my vows day after day." Let's pray. Jesus, we thank you for your persistent friendship to us. We thank you for that grace that you show us that doesn't merely overlook our sin, but actually atones for it. That covers over our shame with your death, and instead gives us all of the good things that are rightfully yours. I pray that you would help us to not be unaware of this. Stir up our spiritual imaginations to see all of the ways that you give us these things, the ways that you give us yourself. I pray for all of these students, for everyone who's participating in this simple, small act of daily devotion, that you would bless them, that you would give them peace, you would make your face to smile upon them and lift your countenance on them. We pray for energy and attention to deal with the day's work, and also for energy and attention to listen to our own souls and to be attentive to what you are doing in us. We love you, and as always, we pray that you would help us to love you more. It's in Jesus' name that we ask this. Amen. A few quick items. One, tomorrow, got a very special guest coming to join us for our daily devotion. My dad, Mike Bronson, is going to sit in with us on this, and that's going to be a lot of fun, and there will be banter, I'm sure, and also an opportunity to see what he's been getting up to, so I'd encourage you to join us for that, 10 a.m. You can also check it out once it posts to Facebook, YouTube, etc. Midweek's coming up again. We've got another midweek at home coming up this Wednesday night. I'm excited for that. You don't want to miss it. And there are a few other items that will be coming down the pike in some updates coming up later on this week and next. As always, if you've got any questions, concerns, or needs, don't hesitate to reach out. I love you, and go in peace.